It started with a quiet sigh at the end of dinner, one of those long, weighty exhales that says more than any words ever could. Liam noticed it, of course. He always noticed the small things when it came to Elena. The way her fingers tapped restlessly against her wineglass. The way her eyes darted away a second too soon when he tried to hold her gaze. "Everything okay?" he asked gently, setting his fork down, giving her his full attention. She hesitated. That pause was the first crack. "I'm just tired," she said, forcing a tired smile. "It's not you, it's just everything. Work, life, me. I feel like I'm suffocating." Liam leaned in. "Do you want to talk about it?" Elena shook her head. "No, not yet. I think I need some space, time to think, to breathe. Maybe just a few days, to clear my head." He nodded, trying to hide the sting in his chest. He didn't protest. He loved her. He believed in her. And most of all, he believed this was just a storm passing through, not a fracture cracking everything open. So he let her go. She packed a small bag the next morning, said she'd be staying at her sister's for a bit, needed to unplug from their life together to figure out what she still wanted. Liam hugged her goodbye, arms stiff, heart pounding with quiet fear he refused to voice. He told himself this was what love looked like sometimes, giving the person you care about space, even when all you want is to pull them close. The first night alone in their house was heavier than he imagined. The silence echoed, pressing in on him from all sides. Her coffee mug still sat on the counter, her robe still hung behind the bathroom door. Every trace of her presence made her absence feel sharper. Liam didn't call, didn't text. He respected her wish for space, but silence can grow teeth. By the third day, he started replaying every conversation over the last few months. The nights she came home late, the way her phone was always face down, the sudden distance in her eyes when they made love. He told himself not to spiral. She needed time, that's all. Then came the message, a photo from a friend who didn't know he was still in the dark. "Hey man, sorry if this is nothing, but I thought you should see this." Liam opened it and froze. Elena, sitting at a café he didn't recognize, her hand resting lightly in someone else's. A man. Not a co-worker, not her sister. A stranger. And she wasn't crying. She wasn't lost. She was smiling. Radiant, even. Liam stared at the image for minutes before he realized he hadn't taken a breath. His fingers tightened around the phone until his knuckles turned white. The woman who said she needed time to find herself had already found someone else. Liam sat in his car long after the engine had gone quiet. The photo still lit up his phone screen, mocking him with its simplicity. Just a snapshot of two people at a cafe. But context is everything. The delicate way Alina's fingers curled around that man's hand wasn't just affection, it was familiarity. That wasn't someone helping her find clarity, that was someone she already trusted. He zoomed in, as if the details might offer him an alternative explanation. Maybe it was an old friend, maybe this was innocent, but the more he studied her expression, the more undeniable it became. Her eyes were soft, her smile effortless, the kind of smile she hadn't given him in months. That's when the ache started, not the raw sting of heartbreak, but the dull, deep pull of reality settling in. He hadn't lost her today. He'd been losing her for a while. The space she asked for wasn't for thinking, it was a courtesy. A curtain she had drawn to shield him from a truth that was already in motion. Liam had respected her request for distance, not realizing that distance had already become a habit for her. Emotional space had turned into physical separation, and now physical separation had turned into intimacy with someone else. Still, some part of him clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this was all a misunderstanding. He told himself that seeing things with his own eyes would settle it. He needed clarity, needed to be certain before the ground beneath him cracked completely. The next morning he drove to the café. It wasn't a place they had ever gone together. That fact alone made his chest tighten. She had picked a corner of the world that didn't belong to them, a place untouched by their history, free of memory or accountability, a place where starting over could feel clean. He arrived early and parked far enough away to not be noticed. He didn't even know what he expected to find. Maybe she wouldn't show. Maybe it really had been a one-off moment, a fluke. But deep down, he knew better. Time dragged, people came and went. The cafe buzzed with quiet conversation and the clink of coffee cups. Then, just as the midday sun settled against the window glass, he saw her, Elena. She stepped out of a silver sedan, not the car she usually drove. She had done something different with her hair, curled it lightly like she used to when they first started dating. She wore a soft, pale sweater, one that fell off her shoulder in that casual, intentional way. She looked beautiful, and she looked like a woman preparing to be seen. Liam's stomach clenched as the man from the photo stepped out from behind her. Jordan, he would later learn. Slightly younger than him, with an easy air about him. Not showy, not overconfident, just present. They sat at the same table from the photo, a small two-seater by the window. As they talked, she laughed, freely. She touched his hand again, this time deliberately. No nerves, no second thoughts. This wasn't new. Liam didn't move. He stayed in the car, invisible behind the windshield, watching his wife smile like nothing was missing in her life. Watching her speak to someone else the way she used to speak to him. Her entire posture had changed. She wasn't the anxious, overwhelmed woman who had asked him for space. She was light, engaged, focused on someone else. There was no confrontation, no dramatic outburst. Liam simply sat in silence, letting the weight of it all press against his chest like water slowly rising. When he finally drove away, he didn't feel anger, not yet. What he felt was a strange kind of mourning, as if something he had loved deeply had quietly died, and no one had bothered to tell him. That night, back in the house that still smelled like her, he poured himself a drink, not to numb anything, but to acknowledge it. The silence felt different now. Before, it had been a placeholder. Now it was a conclusion. Eleanor hadn't gotten lost. She hadn't needed space. She had needed an exit. And instead of owning that truth, she let him wait in the dark, hoping, hurting. Liam stared out the window as the night closed in. The image of her across that table, lit by golden afternoon light, was burned into his memory, not because of what she did, but because of how certain she had looked. She had found something, or someone, just not him, and for the first time he began to consider the possibility that maybe, instead of trying to hold on, it was time to begin letting go. The next morning, Liam woke early, not because of an alarm or any sense of urgency, but because sleep had become impossible. His body rested, but his mind remained in motion. Even in dreams, he couldn't escape the image of Elena at that cafe, leaning across the table with a smile that had once belonged to him. He sat at the edge of the bed they used to share, the sheets still crumpled on her side, cold and untouched. That alone was a small reminder. She hadn't called, hadn't messaged, hadn't even bothered to check in. There was no guilt, no breadcrumb of concern for how he might be handling her absence. The photo, the cafe, the man. They weren't coincidences anymore. They were a confession. He took his time that morning, moving with a stillness that almost felt ceremonial. He showered, got dressed, skipped breakfast. The drive back to the cafe was quiet, the streets half asleep under soft clouds, as if the world itself was trying not to intrude on what he was about to face. He parked in the same spot as before, tucked away across the street. Part of him hoped she wouldn't show, that maybe yesterday had been a rare misstep, a fluke. But another part of him knew this wasn't an accident. What he saw yesterday wasn't a beginning. It was a routine. She arrived 10 minutes later. Same soft sweater, though this time in a light green shade. Jeans that clung to her in that relaxed, familiar way. Her hair pulled into a loose bun. No makeup. No need for it. She looked at ease, radiant, not in an artificial way, but in the calm, satisfied glow of someone living exactly how they want. And there he was again, Jordan. They embraced briefly, not with the heat of new lovers, but with the quiet tenderness of people who'd done this many times before. The way they walked together, shoulders occasionally brushing, bodies instinctively sinking, spoke of comfort, not secrecy, not guilt. They chose the same table, ordered without hesitation. This wasn't discovery for them, it was habit. And that's what finally broke something loose in Liam's chest. He wasn't witnessing a betrayal in progress. He was seeing the new chapter of a life that had already left him behind. Liam didn't storm inside. He didn't demand answers. There was nothing left to ask. Watching them from behind glass, he understood something deeply painful and undeniably final. Alina wasn't coming back. And worse, she hadn't really left him to think. She just needed a soft place to land before moving on. There was something haunting about seeing her so happy, not just because of what it said about her, but because of what it reflected about their marriage. If she had been capable of that much peace, that much warmth, why had he never seen it like this when they were together? Was he the thing she was escaping from? Or was she simply revealing a version of herself he was never meant to know? He sat there for nearly an hour, watching their conversation unfold without hearing a single word. They laughed, shared bites of dessert, held eye contact in that way couples do when they're still fascinated by each other. Elena leaned in when she spoke to Jordan. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And then it hit him, not like a knife, but like a slow, cold wave. She was already gone, emotionally, physically, mentally. She wasn't coming home. Maybe she never had any intention of doing so. Liam lowered his gaze, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel. He didn't cry. He didn't shake. He just sat in that terrible clarity that heartbreak eventually brings. Not the panicked early phase filled with questions and what-ifs, but the quiet, steady ache of reality. This was the moment he had dreaded, but also the one he had needed. Confirmation, the end of doubt. It may have crushed any hope left in him, but at least it freed him from limbo. Now he could stop waiting, stop wondering. On the way home, he didn't play music. He kept the windows up. The world outside blurred past him, but inside the car, everything was sharp and still. He began to recall the last few months of their marriage through a different lens. Her distracted phone calls, her early exits from dinner, her sudden need for breathing room. It all made sense now, not as isolated moments, but as breadcrumbs leading away from him and towards something new. By the time he pulled into the driveway, the decision was made, not out of anger or bitterness, but from something stronger, self-respect. He wasn't going to chase her. He wasn't going to wait for apologies she didn't owe or offer. There was no version of this where they returned to what they were. That man, the one who waited patiently, who believed in time and healing, no longer existed. He walked into the house and closed the door softly behind him. The silence was familiar now, but no longer oppressive. It felt like a space that could be filled with something else, something true. He stood there for a moment, looking at the framed photo on the hallway shelf, one taken on their 10-year anniversary. They were laughing, arms wrapped around each other in front of a lake they used to visit. He picked it up, held it for a while, then quietly, gently, he turned it face down. The discovery wasn't just that she had chosen someone else, it was that he was finally ready to choose himself. Liam didn't walk into their home like a man betrayed. He didn't slam doors or throw things or pace the floor with clenched fists. He moved quietly through the house they had built together, past the walls painted in her favorite neutrals, past the bookshelf where her novels sat untouched for months, past the coffee table where they used to leave little notes for each other before life got too busy. But he didn't want a dramatic moment. He didn't want yelling or blame or tears. He wanted truth. Simple, undeniable truth. The kind that didn't need explanation or justification, just acknowledgement. It was late when Elena came back. Not too late to be suspicious, just late enough to send a message. She walked through the door with the ease of someone who no longer felt the weight of being seen. Her keys jingled lightly as she set them down, and when she noticed Liam sitting at the kitchen table, she paused, clearly surprised. "Oh," she said, brushing hair from her face. "You're still up." Liam looked at her for a moment before speaking. "Yeah," he said, voice calm but firm. "I wanted to talk." Elena nodded slowly. "Okay, sure. What's going on?" He motioned for her to sit. She hesitated, but took the chair across from him. There was a long silence between them, not the kind that begged to be filled, but the kind that weighed heavy with meaning. "I saw you," Liam said finally. "At the café twice?" Elena blinked. For a second her breath caught in her throat, but she didn't deny it. She didn't reach for excuses or spin a story. Instead, she exhaled quietly, her shoulders slumping just enough to betray the truth she'd been trying to contain. Liam continued, not angry, just resolute. "You told me you needed time, space. You said you were overwhelmed, that you had to find yourself. I respected that. I gave you that." "I know," she said softly. Her voice was small now, stripped of its usual layers of logic and deflection. "And I'm sorry." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he let the silence say what words couldn't. The distance between them wasn't just physical. It had been forming long before Jordan entered the picture, but watching it materialize in front of him now, in her posture, in her gaze, made it feel like the final page of a book he'd already read too many times. "I wasn't going to follow you," Liam said. "I wasn't going to check up on you. I trusted that whatever you were going through was real, that maybe you just needed clarity. It started before I even asked for space," she whispered. "I didn't plan it like this. It just happened." Liam nodded slowly, processing the weight of her words. "That's the part that hurts the most. Not the fact that you met someone else, not even that you lied. It's that you made me wait in the dark while you stepped into the light." Elena's eyes welled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. Maybe she knew they wouldn't change anything now. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you." "But you did," Liam replied, his voice steady. "You made a choice, and that's okay. You're allowed to change. You're allowed to want something different. But I deserve to know when you stop choosing me." Her lip trembled slightly, but she kept her hands folded in her lap, as if trying to contain the chaos inside her. "Do you hate me?" "No," Liam said, and he meant it. "I don't hate you. But I can't keep giving pieces of myself to someone who's already whole somewhere else." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The clock ticked softly in the background. The refrigerator hummed. Life continued in all its ordinary noise as something quietly broke between them. "I'm not going to make this messy," Liam said after a beat. "I'm not going to yell or beg or pretend this didn't happen. I just want you to be honest from here on out. With me, with him, with yourself." Elena nodded, wiping under her eyes. "Okay." He stood then, not in anger but with a quiet finality. "I'll start looking for a new place. You can stay here. It was always your space more than mine anyway." "You don't have to leave," she began. "I do," he said gently. "I can't breathe here anymore." Elena covered her mouth with her hand, but said nothing. Liam walked to the doorway, paused, and turned back one last time. "You didn't just fall for someone else, Elena. You stopped trying with me. And I finally saw that. So, I'm done waiting." With that, he walked out. No door slammed, no goodbye was shouted. The only sound that remained was the soft closing of a door, followed by silence. A silence Elena had once begged for, and now had all to herself. Liam didn't look back. He packed his things over the course of 2 quiet days, methodically, without drama. He didn't announce his departure, didn't write a farewell letter or leave behind a symbolic message. He simply collected the pieces of his life that still belonged to him, his books, his clothes, a few photographs that held meaning independent of Elena, and he left the rest. There was no need to carry dead weight into a new chapter. He moved into a modest apartment on the east side of town, a space far smaller than the home he'd shared with Elena, but somehow more breathable. There were no ghosts in the corners, no scent of her perfume lingering in the drapes, no memories hiding in the texture of the walls. It was quiet, unfamiliar, and, most importantly, it was his. For a while the evenings were the hardest. After work, when the city dimmed and the silence stretched long and unbroken, the ache of what was lost tried to return. Sometimes he found himself glancing at his phone, expecting a message that never came. But over time the need to hear from her dulled. The space she once occupied in his life didn't vanish, but it shrank, bit by bit, until it no longer dictated his rhythm. He started reading again. Long walks became a habit, not a distraction. He joined a community gym and began lifting weights, not to reinvent himself, but to reconnect with his body, to feel strong in ways that had nothing to do with love. A few weeks later, a friend invited him to a photography exhibit downtown. He almost said no, but something in him, perhaps the first flicker of curiosity in months, said yes. And that's how healing began. Not with some grand revelation or dramatic new romance, but with small choices, with showing up for himself day after day. Elena, on the other hand, found herself surrounded by the quiet she once craved. The house, though beautiful, felt emptier than she expected. Jordan was still around, at first, charming, attentive, full of all the warmth Liam had once radiated without effort. But as the weeks passed, something in Jordan shifted. The intrigue faded. The little gestures became fewer, and eventually, so did he. He didn't ghost her. He just started replying less, showing up later, not showing up at all. When she asked if something was wrong, he smiled and said no, everything was fine. But she recognized the tone. She'd used it herself, once, when detaching from someone she no longer wanted to hurt, but couldn't keep holding on to. The truth was, Jordan had been a chapter, not a destination, a comfortable pause between two lives, but not the kind of man who built anything lasting. Elena came home one evening and found the house unbearably quiet. She sat at the kitchen table, her table, and realized she didn't know who to call. Her friends were kind, but distant. Her sister had grown cold after hearing the details of what happened, and Liam was gone. Not just physically, he had taken the part of himself that once waited, once forgave, once hoped, and he had walked away with it. She picked up her phone, hovered over his name in her contacts, and then set it down again. What would she even say? I miss you. Didn't work out. I made a mistake. None of it would matter. The door she had closed wasn't locked by him. She had shut it herself, and now it stayed closed. Not out of anger, but because some endings are final even without slamming. Across the city, Liam stood by his window, watching the golden hour cast long shadows over the quiet street below. He breathed deeply, the way you do when a storm passes and the sky clears. Not because everything is perfect, but because you're still standing. He wasn't waiting anymore. He was moving forward.